He posted a simple notice: Cook wanted. What showed up at his door would change his life forever: a broken wagon, a desperate woman, 3 children with hollow eyes who flinched at every sudden movement. Children who had been taught to stay small and silent so they wouldn't get hit. Martha and her kids weren't just looking for work. They were running from a monster, her dead husband's brother, who believed he owned them now. And he had promised, "You can't hide from family." Ethan Cole had spent 3 years hiding from the world on his lonely ranch. He wanted nothing to do with other people's problems. But when he saw those children shivering in the cold, something inside him woke up. Then winter came, the roads closed, and somewhere out there a dangerous man was waiting for spring, waiting to take what he believed was his. What Ethan does next will either save this broken family or destroy them all. This story proves that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running and finally stand your ground. If you believe that protecting the ones who need you is worth any risk, leave a comment below. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who understands that real strength means choosing to stay. The wind howled down from the peaks like a hungry wolf. Ethan Cole stood on his porch, collar pulled up tight, watching the last bit of November light fade away. His ranch was tucked in a hollow, sheltered from the worst of the storms, but so isolated that winter meant not seeing another soul for weeks on end. That was just fine by him. Being alone was his shield. He pulled the worn notice from his pocket. The words were simple: Cook wanted. Hollow Ridge Ranch. He had finally posted it after burning one too many pots of beans. The trading post keeper, old Samuel Briggs, had given him a long look. "You sure about this, Cole? Inviting a stranger up here?" Ethan had just shrugged. "I just need someone who can cook without making charcoal." Samuel polished his glasses. "Well, sometimes what a man needs and what a man gets are two mighty different things." Now, standing in the cold twilight, Ethan figured no one was coming anyway. Folks with any sense were hunkered down for the winter, not looking for work on some lonely ranch. Then he heard it, the tired groan of wagon wheels on frozen dirt. Ethan's hand went straight to the rifle leaning against the rail. Visitors this late in the year were almost always trouble. The wagon that appeared from the trees looked like it was held together by hope and baling wire. One wheel wobbled something awful. The canvas top was more patches than canvas. It looked more like a quilt than a proper cover. The mule pulling it had a look that said it had given up on ever resting again, but was too stubborn to stop. When the wagon got closer, Ethan saw the driver. She was a woman, younger than he expected, with a face that looked like it had forgotten what good luck felt like. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and her dress was faded to the color of an old bruise. Behind her sat the reason his chest got tight. 3 little kids, 2 girls and a boy, huddled under blankets that looked paper thin. They stared at him with big, weary eyes. The woman pulled the mule to a stop. For a long moment, nobody said a word. She looked him over, searching for danger, just like he was doing to her. "You Ethan Cole?" Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I am. You posted a notice for a cook." "I did," he said, "but I did not expect anyone this deep into winter." "Desperation will make a person do foolish things," she said with no pity in her voice. "Do you still need somebody?" Ethan looked past her to the children. The oldest girl had her arms wrapped tight around the other 2. The little boy's lips were tinged with blue from the cold. "I needed a cook," he said slowly. "I'm not so sure I needed a cook and 3 little ones." He saw something flicker in her eyes, not surprise, just the look of a woman who expected the worst. She picked up the reins. "Then we will be on our way." "Hold on." The words came out sharper than he meant. Ethan walked down the steps, moving slow like he was approaching a skittish horse. "I did not say I was turning you away. I just said it was a surprise." The woman's hands froze on the reins. He could see the exhaustion carved into her face. "What is your name?" "Martha Hale," she said. Then she added, "These are my children. Sarah is 9, Clara is 6, and Thomas is 4. They are good kids. They will not be any trouble." He looked at the wagon, at their few belongings, and at the quiet children. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir." "Can you do it without setting my kitchen on fire?" A tiny hint of a smile touched her lips. "I kept my own house standing for 10 years. I think I can handle yours." Ethan glanced back at his ranch house. It was a big, solid place built by his granddaddy. It had 4 bedrooms upstairs that had been empty for years. The kitchen was big enough for a whole crew of ranch hands. But for the last 3 years, it had just been him. There was more than enough room. "There is a room off the kitchen," he heard himself say. "It is small, but it is warm. You and the children can take it for tonight." Martha Hale just stared at him, like he was speaking another language. "You are offering us a room inside?" "Well, I'm not putting children in the barn when it is this cold," Ethan said, turning back to the porch. "Get your people inside. I will take care of your mule." He did not wait for an answer. As he unhitched the tired animal, he could hear her soft voice telling the children to climb down carefully. In the barn, he settled the mule with hay and water. He stood in the quiet for a minute, listening to the animal breathe. What in the world had he just done? He came to Hollow Ridge to get away from people, to live a simple, quiet life. Now he had 4 strangers in his house for the winter. Samuel's words came back to him. "Sometimes what a man needs and what a man gets are 2 mighty different things." He shook his head and walked back to the house. The kitchen was already warmer. Martha was standing by the stove, with little Thomas pressed against her side. The 2 girls stood by the door, holding hands, watching everything with those big, solemn eyes. They were all so thin, the kind of thin that comes from too many missed meals. "The room is through there," Ethan pointed. "It is not much, but you will be warm." Martha just said it, plain and simple, like being warm was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Maybe it was," she whispered. "Thank you kindly, Mr. Cole." He waved a hand. "Ethan, if you're going to be cooking my meals, we can drop the formalities." He moved past them to the cupboards and pulled out what little he had on hand. There was some bread from town, a bit of dried deer meat, and a jar of preserves. "It is a mite late for a proper supper," he said, "but this ought to hold you all over till morning." He set the food on the table and gave them their space. Martha, like she'd done it 1,000 times, guided her children to the chairs. She divided up the food so carefully, you could tell she knew how to make a little go a long, long way. She broke the bread, gave each child a sliver of meat, and spread the preserves on real thin. Ethan watched from over by the stove. It struck him how the kitchen went from dead quiet to being full of life in a heartbeat. He heard the scrape of chairs, Martha's soft words, and the small sounds of children eating like they hadn't seen food in a week. When was the last time they ate, he wondered. Martha didn't even look up. "Yesterday morning. We had a little money, but the innkeeper in the valley—" She trailed off. Ethan went right back to the cupboard and pulled down more bread and more meat. But Martha's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was a whole lot stronger than he expected. "We don't take handouts. We can't pay you back." "This ain't a handout," he said, meeting her dark, direct brown eyes. "You agreed to work for your keep. Just consider this an advance." Her hand stayed on his wrist for a second more. Then she let go. She gave him one sharp, businesslike nod and turned back to her children. Ethan left them to their meal and went to check on the little room off the kitchen. It was small, like he said, barely 10 feet by 10 feet, with a narrow bed against the wall. The stovepipe ran through it, which kept it warmer than the rest of the house. He'd just been using it for storage, but he cleared the boxes out to the barn to sort through later. He found some clean blankets upstairs that smelled like cedar. He piled them on the bed, then stood back. It was not much, he knew, but it was warm and dry. And for Martha and her little ones, it was safe. That was probably more than they'd had in a good long while. When he got back to the kitchen, the children were done eating and were all leaned up against each other, plumb tuckered out. Martha, exhausted as she was, had already started on the dishes. "Leave those," Ethan said quietly. "Get your people settled in for the night. You can start earning your keep come sunup." Martha paused, then nodded. She dried her hands and gently gathered her children. Ethan stepped out of the way as they filed past him into the small room. The oldest girl, Sarah, stopped right in front of him. She looked up with her mama's serious eyes. "Thank you for the supper, Mr. Cole." Her voice was tiny but clear. "You're welcome, Sarah." The girl's eyes went wide for a second, surprised he remembered her name. Then she hurried on. Martha was the last one. She stopped in the doorway. "Mr. Cole, Ethan, I know you took a chance on us. I swear I won't make you regret it." "See that you don't," he said, his voice a little rough. He never was comfortable with folks thanking him. "Breakfast is at dawn. The kitchen's all yours." "Yes, sir." She started to close the door, but then she stopped. "Why'd you let us in? You could have just turned us away." Ethan thought on it for a moment. He thought about the cold he saw in those kids' eyes and the pride in Martha's shoulders. He thought about how loneliness had been his only company for so long. "Because I know what it's like to need a helping hand," he said, the words coming out gruff. "And because no child ought to sleep in a cold barn when there's a warm bed nearby." Martha just looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face changed, like she understood. Then she nodded and gently closed the door. Ethan stood there in the quiet kitchen for a spell, listening to them get settled. He banked the fire and locked the doors before heading upstairs. For the first time in 3 long years, there was more than just his own heartbeat in that house. And against his better judgment, he found some comfort in that. The wind howled something fierce outside. But inside Hollow Ridge Ranch, 5 souls slept warm. Winter had truly come. But this year, Ethan Cole wouldn't face it all by himself. Morning came gray and cold. Ethan woke up to the smell of coffee. For a second, he thought he'd dreamed the whole thing. Then he heard someone moving around downstairs, the quiet sound of the stove being stoked. He dressed quick and headed down. The kitchen was different, not in a big way, but in all the small ways that say a house has life in it. The stove was hot and coffee was steaming in the pot. Martha was at the counter slicing bread like she'd done it 10,000 times. She looked up when he came in, her face wary. "Good morning. I hope I didn't disturb you." "No," Ethan said, moving toward the warmth of the stove. "Coffee smells good. There's bacon frying, and I can make you some eggs. I found what you had in the pantry. I hope you don't mind I took a look around. I need to know what we have to work with." She sounded like she expected him to be mad. Ethan poured a cup of coffee. "The kitchen and the pantry are yours to manage. Just let me know when we're running low on something." He took a sip. It was the best coffee he'd had in years. "Where are the children?" "Still sleeping. They were worn clean out." Martha turned the bacon with a fork. "I figured I'd let them rest. Being warm with full bellies probably helped, but they've been cold for a long while now." Ethan heard what she wasn't saying. Her children had been cold and hungry for so long it had become normal for them. He watched her in the morning light. She was pretty, he reckoned, in a way that showed she'd been through a lot. Her hair was already pinned up neat, and her faded blue dress was clean. There was a quiet strength about her. "You said you were a widow." Her hand stopped for just a second. "Yes. My husband passed 4 months back. An accident at the mill." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be," she said flatly, then added, "It was quick. He didn't suffer." Ethan knew a lie when he heard one. Not about the death, but about the grief, or the lack of it. "How'd you end up way out here in Wyoming?" "We were in Ohio. After he passed, there were debts to pay. The house wasn't ours anymore." I have an aunt up in Montana who said there was work to be had if I could just get there. She moved the bacon to a plate, her hands steady and sure. We pushed our luck a little too hard with winter, and it caught up with us near Hollow Ridge. The wagons were beat, and my boy Thomas came down with a bad fever. We had to stop. That is when I saw your notice for a housekeeper. My aunt in Montana will just have to figure we are not coming. Martha spoke plainly as she cracked 3 eggs into a hot skillet. That was more than I ever bothered with. She said, I can write to her later on. The eggs sputtered in bacon grease. I watched her move around my kitchen. She had a way about her, a quiet skill that said she had run a home for many years. You will need wages, I finally said. I can pay $10 a month. That includes room and board for you and the children. I reckon that is fair for a place this size. Martha looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. That is more than fair. Most folks would offer 7. I stood and set my empty coffee cup down. Well, most folks do not have 3 extra mouths to feed, and I figure good cooking is worth paying for. She almost smiled at that. I accept your terms, she said. Good. I am usually out with the livestock in the mornings. You and the kids will have the house to yourselves. Just keep them warm and fed. That is all I ask. I was reaching for my coat when her voice stopped me, quiet but solid as an oak post. Mr. Cole, Ethan, I need to know something. I turned back around. If someone comes around here looking for us, she said, meeting my gaze head-on, will you tell them we are here? The whole kitchen went silent. All you could hear was a lone crow cawing outside. I looked at Martha's face and saw the fear she was trying so hard to hide. Is someone likely to come looking? I do not know. The honesty in her voice was sharp as a shard of glass. But if they do, I have not seen any woman with 3 children. I pulled my coat on, my voice flat and final. As far as anyone needs to know, I hired a widow named Martha Hale. The rest is nobody's business. I saw the tightness in her shoulders ease just a bit. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, I said with a hint of a smile. Winter is a long, hard season. We are stuck with each other until the spring thaw. The barn door creaked open, and the oldest girl, Sarah, was standing there. She was bundled in a coat that looked a sight too thin for the biting cold. Mama sent me to ask if you need anything from the house. I leaned on my pitchfork and took a good look at her. She had her mother's serious dark eyes, but she looked older than her 9 years. Your mama let you come out here by yourself? She's watching from the window. Sarah pointed back at the house, and sure enough, I could see Martha's shape in the kitchen. She said, I need to be useful to earn my keep. You are 9 years old, I told her. Your only job is being a kid, not earning anything. The girl just blinked, like she did not understand the words. But Mama works, so I should too. I sighed and put the pitchfork down. Tell you what, you can help me gather eggs from the chicken coop. That would be a real help. A little light finally came into Sarah's face. I am good at gathering eggs. I used to do it at home before. Her voice trailed off, the light going out. Before you had to leave your home, I finished for her, speaking softly. Your mama told me about your father. The girl stared down at the toes of her worn boots. Mama said we do not talk about him. Then we will not talk about him, I said. Come on, those hens are waiting. We worked without talking much. She was good with the chickens, moving carefully so she did not break a single egg. Mr. Cole? She asked in a small voice. Is it true? Will you really let us stay all winter? That is what I told your mother, even though we are extra trouble. I looked at this little girl who thought her and her family were just a burden. You are not trouble, Sarah. You are folks who needed a hand. That is all there is to it. She thought about that for a moment, then gave a tiny nod. As she was about to go back to the house, she turned around. Mr. Cole, at our old place, my father, he used to get real angry about little things, like a broken plate. She took a shaky breath. Will you get angry if we break things or make noise? That question hit me hard. I knelt down to her level. Sarah, look at me. This is a ranch. Things break. Kids make noise. That is just life. All that matters is that you are safe and warm. Do you understand me? She looked right into my eyes, trying to decide if I was telling the truth. Then slowly she nodded. Okay. When I came in for lunch, the whole house smelled wonderful. Martha had made a thick soup with vegetables and salt pork, with fresh bread on the side. It was the kind of meal that warms you from the inside out. The children were at the table, eating without a sound, but they looked less like frightened rabbits than they did before. The little boy, Thomas, had some color back in his cheeks. "This is real good," I said after the first bite. Martha just nodded and refilled my bowl. "Sarah said she helped you with the eggs." "She did," I answered. "She is a good helper." Sarah ducked her head down, but I saw her smile. We ate the rest of the meal in a comfortable quiet. It was the good kind of silence, not the heavy kind that comes from being afraid to speak. It felt like family. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes when folks are more focused on eating than talking. Clara, the little girl in the middle, kept peeking at Ethan, trying to size him up. Young Thomas was all business, giving his soup his full attention. After lunch, Ethan went back outside to work. A cold north wind started blowing in, and by the time the sun went down, the first snowflakes were drifting from the sky. He battened down the barn and walked back to the house as the storm gathered. The windows glowed with a warm, golden light that felt like a welcome. He could hear muffled voices inside. When he stepped through the door and stamped the snow off his boots, he saw the children sitting with Martha by the stove. She was mending a shirt by lamplight. Sarah was practicing her letters on a slate, and little Thomas had fallen asleep leaning against his mother. They all looked up, but this time they seemed less worn out. Martha gave him a small nod. "Supper is ready when you are," she said. "Just stew and biscuits." "Sounds mighty fine," he replied. He washed up and joined them. The stew was rich and warm, just what a man needed after a day in the cold. This strange new family ate together while the snow fell harder and the wind howled down from the mountains. After supper, Martha tucked the children into bed, her voice a low murmur through the wall. Ethan sat by the stove, reading an old newspaper from town. He was aware of the simple sounds of a home around him, water heating for dishes, the soft shuffle of Martha's feet, and the crackle of the fire. When she finished with the children, she started washing the dishes. Ethan lowered his paper and watched her. "They seem to be settling in," he said. Martha scrubbed a pot. "They were worried you would send us away." "I am not in the habit of turning people out into a blizzard." "Some men would have," she said, setting the clean pot aside. "Some would not have let us in at all." Ethan did not have an answer for that, so he kept quiet. He read and she worked until the kitchen was clean. "I should turn in," Martha said. "Morning comes early." "It surely does," Ethan agreed, setting his paper down. "Martha, if you need anything for you or the children, make a list. I will get it next time I go to town." She paused at her door. "I will. And Ethan, thank you. You cooked 3 meals and kept this house warm. I ought to be thanking you." A hint of a smile touched her eyes. "Then I suppose we are even." She slipped into her room, closing the door gently. Ethan sat by the stove, listening to the storm and the quiet breathing of the house. He had been alone for 3 years. In just one day, everything had changed. He thought he should feel uneasy. Instead, as he banked the fire and went up to his cold room, he felt a sense of relief. The house had people in it again. The kitchen felt warm with more than just the fire. For better or worse, winter had brought him company. Tomorrow would bring new problems. There would be questions and gossip from town about the widow and her children showing up at Hollow Ridge. But for tonight, 5 people were warm and fed while a storm raged. And as he drifted off to sleep, Ethan thought that was enough. The first week settled into a surprisingly easy rhythm. Martha was up before dawn every morning with coffee ready, running the kitchen with a quiet skill. The children started to relax, moving through the house like they belonged there. On the 8th morning, Ethan woke up to dead silence. It felt wrong. There was no smell of coffee, no sound from the stove, no murmur of Martha's voice. He dressed fast and went downstairs. The kitchen was cold, and Martha's door was still shut. He hesitated, then knocked softly. "Martha?" Her voice came back, strained and rough. "Just a moment." When she opened the door, she looked awful. Her face was flushed with fever and her eyes were glassy. She leaned against the doorframe to keep from falling. "I am sorry," she rushed the words out. "I will get breakfast started." "You need to get back in that bed," Ethan said, catching her elbow as she swayed. "How long have you felt this way?" "It is nothing, just a cold." But her teeth were chattering. "The children need their mother," she insisted. He guided her firmly back toward the bed. He could see her 3 little ones huddled together, Sarah watching with wide eyes. "How are they?" "They are fine. It is just me." Martha tried to pull away, but she was too weak. "Please, I can work." "Martha," he said, his voice firm enough to cut through her feverish confusion. "Get back in that bed. That is not a request." She stared at him, fear mixing with the panic of knowing all the fight just seemed to drain right out of her. She sank onto the bed, her shoulders slumped. "I cannot be sick," she whispered, her voice barely there. "You will send us away." Those words hit Ethan harder than a physical punch. He knelt down to look her straight in the eye. "I am not sending anybody away for a fever. You are sick. People get sick. You rest up and we will manage just fine until you are back on your feet." He pulled the blankets up to her chin. "Now, I have been making my own breakfast for 3 years. I think I can handle it." "Sleep. That is in order." She mumbled, "You are not a doctor." "No, but I am the one signing your paychecks, which means you listen to me," he said, trying to get a little smile out of her. Martha's eyes finally drifted shut. "What about the children?" "I will take care of them." Ethan stood up and looked at Sarah, who was watching everything with those serious eyes. "Your mom is sick. The 3 of you are going to help me today. Can you do that?" Sarah gave a solemn nod and slipped out of bed. "First, let your mom sleep. Come on, let's get the kitchen warmed up and figure out breakfast." He guided the children out, closing the door as quiet as he could. In the kitchen, Sarah gathered her brother and sister by the stove while Ethan brought the fire back to life. Clara's little face was pinched with worry, and Thomas just watched Ethan, thumb stuck in his mouth. "Is Mama going to die?" Clara's voice was a tiny whisper. "No," Ethan said, his voice firm and full of a confidence he hoped was true. "She has a fever, and she needs to rest. That is all. She will be better in a few days." "Our papa got sick," Thomas mumbled. Then he was gone. Ethan paused, hit once again by how much hurt these little ones had seen. He turned and leaned against the counter. "I am real sorry about your papa. That must have been awful hard. But your mama has a different kind of sick. Just a winter cold, not the kind that takes people away." "You promise?" Clara asked, her eyes looking huge in her small face. Ethan knew promises could be broken by a world that did not care. But right then, these kids needed to hear one. "I promise your mama's going to be just fine." Sarah, the oldest, still looked doubtful, but kept quiet. She had learned not to trust easy words. "All right, then." Ethan turned back to the stove. "Who knows how to make coffee?" Sarah raised her hand. "Mama showed me." "Good. You are on coffee. Clara, can you set the table? Thomas, your job is to stay out of the way. Can you handle that?" The boy nodded, planting himself on the warm floor by the stove. They worked together, not as smoothly as Martha, but they got it done. Sarah measured the coffee grounds carefully. Clara put out the plates. Ethan even managed to fry bacon without burning it down, though the eggs were a sorry sight with broken yolks. They ate quietly, the children still worried about their mother. Ethan watched them, noticing things he had missed before. The little scar on Clara's chin. The way Thomas's left boot was almost worn through. How Sarah had bitten her nails down to nothing. "After breakfast," he said. "Sarah, I want you to check on your mama every hour. If anything changes, you come get me right away. Understand?" "Yes, sir. Clara, you are helping me with the chickens. Thomas, you stay inside where it is warm." They all nodded. The morning passed in this new, strange way. Ethan worked in the barn, but he found his ears were always tuned to the house, listening. Clara was a good helper for her size, doing what she was told without a fuss. "Mr. Cole?" she asked, scattering feed for the chickens. "When Mama gets better, will we have to leave?" "Why in the world would you leave?" "Because we are trouble." She said it like it was a fact. Papa always said we were more trouble than we were worth. Ethan stopped his work and turned to face her. "Clara, look at me. Your papa was wrong, plain and simple. You are not trouble." He knelt down to her level. "You are children. Children need to be cared for. That is not trouble. That is just how it is. And your mama works hard for you. That makes you a family worth having around." Clara's eyes welled up with tears, but she blinked them back hard. "Mama says we are not supposed to cry." "Well, your mama is wrong about that too," Ethan said softly. "Crying is just feelings spilling out. There is nothing wrong with it." A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I am scared Mama is going to die. She is not going to die." Ethan gave her his handkerchief. "I know you are scared, but your mom is strong. She's going to be fine, I promise." "Can I keep this?" she asked, clutching the cloth. "Just until she is better. You keep it as long as you need." They finished their chores without another word. Back at the house, Sarah reported that Martha was still sleeping, her fever still high. Ethan tried his hand at making soup for lunch. It was a watery, sad-looking thing, but the children ate it without a single complaint. "It is not as good as Mama's," Thomas finally announced. "Thomas," Sarah whispered sharply. "It is fine," Ethan said with a small smile. "He is right. Your Mama is a much better cook than me." After lunch, Ethan went to check on Martha himself. She was deep asleep, her face flushed with fever. He gently touched her forehead. It was hot, but not worryingly so. Even asleep, he could see the lines of strain on her face. She looked younger, more vulnerable. He noticed the old trunk in the corner, the only thing that was truly theirs. It was not locked. Inside, he saw a few worn, mended clothes for the children, a hairbrush, and a small Bible. At the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, was a bundle of letters tied with string. Ethan felt like he was prying, so he gently closed the trunk and left the room. The afternoon crawled by. Sarah kept checking on her mother, always with the same report. Still sleeping, still feverish. As evening settled in, Ethan came inside to find all three children huddled by Martha's door, whispering. Sarah looked up at him, her face pale. She is awake, but she is not making any sense. She keeps saying someone is coming, that we have to hide. Ethan pushed past them into the room. Martha was sitting straight up in bed, her eyes wide and wild. "They will find us," she said, her voice frantic. "I should not have stopped here. He will send someone. He promised he would." "Martha." Ethan kept his voice low and calm. "You are safe. You are at Hollow Ridge. It is just the fever talking." She looked right through him. "You do not understand. He said if I ever took them," her voice broke. "The letters. I should not have kept the letters. Now he will know where we went." "Martha, listen to me," Ethan said, sitting on the edge of the bed, was helpless. He took her hands in his. They were burning hot. "No one is coming," he said softly. "You are all safe here." "Promise?" The word was a child's plea. "Promise they cannot find us." "I promise," he said. And he meant it, though he did not know who he was promising to protect them from. "Now lie back down and rest." She let him arrange the pillows, but her hand clutched his sleeve. "Do not let him take them," she begged. "Whatever happens to me, do not let him take my children." "Nobody is taking anyone," Ethan said, smoothing the blankets. "Sleep now. I will watch over things." Her eyes closed, but she held on. "He hit them," she whispered. "Thomas mostly, because he cried. I could not stop him. I tried, but—" "Martha, sleep," Ethan said gently but firmly. "We can talk when you are better." Her grip finally loosened as she fell into a troubled sleep. Ethan stayed a moment, his mind putting the pieces together. The children flinching, Sarah's fear of breaking things, Martha's constant worry. Her husband had been a cruel man. When Ethan left the room, 3 pairs of worried eyes were on him. He closed the door quietly and knelt to their level. "Your mama's going to be fine. The fever is just making her confused. That is all. She will be better tomorrow." "She said someone is coming," Sarah said, her voice small. "She is right, is not she?" Ethan looked at the little girl, who seemed far too old for her years. "Is there someone who might be looking for y'all?" Sarah glanced at her brother and sister, then back to Ethan. "Mama said we do not talk about it. She said bad things happen if we do. Sarah, I need to know if you're in danger." The little girl's face was a mess of conflict. Finally, she whispered, "Our papa had a brother, Uncle James. When Papa died, Uncle James said we had to live with him. Mama said no. Uncle James said he had rights, that family belonged together." She swallowed hard. "He told Mama that if she ran, he would find us. He said we belonged to him now." "And your mama did not want to go," Ethan stated. Sarah shook her head hard. "Uncle James was mean like Papa, especially when he drank. Mama heard him say he would make her sorry and teach her respect." Her voice got even quieter. "The night before we left, someone threw a rock through our window with a note on it. Mama burned it, but I saw what it said. You can't hide from family." A cold dread settled over Ethan. "Does this uncle know where you are going?" "I do not know." "Maybe," Sarah said miserably. "Are we in trouble? Did we bring trouble to you?" "No," Ethan said, his voice like iron. "You did not bring trouble. Trouble was already following you, but you are safe here now. I will not let anyone take you or your mother anywhere you do not want to go. Do you understand?" "How?" Clara's little voice asked. "Uncle James is big and mean." "I do not have to be bigger or meaner," Ethan said, standing up. "I just have to be here on my land, protecting the people under my roof. This is my ranch. That makes you my responsibility, and I take care of my own." The children looked at me, their faces a mix of hope and fear. Suddenly, the little boy, Thomas, left his sisters and wrapped his small arms tight around my leg. "Do not let the bad man get us," he mumbled into my trousers. Something inside my chest that had been sleeping for a long time woke up right then. I lifted the boy into my arms. He was lighter than a feather. I looked at Sarah and Clara and made them a promise. I will not. That night, I could not find much sleep. I kept thinking about Martha, who had run so far with her children to escape a man who did not know the meaning of family. I thought about those kids who had learned to be quiet and small so they would not get hurt. Around midnight, I heard a floorboard creak downstairs. It was Sarah standing in the kitchen. "Could not sleep?" I asked her softly. She jumped, then shook her head. "I just wanted to make sure Mama was still breathing." "She is," I said. "Since we are both up, how about some warm milk?" "We do not have any milk." I smiled a little. "Actually, we do. I have 2 milk cows in the barn. I have just been too lazy to use them properly, but I know how." He warmed some milk in a pan, stirring in a bit of honey he had saved. Sarah just sat at the table, watching him with her serious little eyes. "You really will not let Uncle James take us?" "No, ma'am, I will not." Ethan poured the milk into 2 cups and sat with her. "Sarah, family is not always about blood. Sometimes it is about the folks who show up when you are in trouble. Your mama chose to come here, and I chose to let you all stay. That makes us something." Sarah held the warm cup. "At home, Papa always said blood was everything. He said you did what you were told, or else. Sounds to me like your papa had things backward. Are you married, Mr. Cole?" The question caught him by surprise. "I was, a long time ago." "What happened?" She passed on. "A fever like your mama's, only worse. This was before I moved to Wyoming. The words came easy in the dark. Her name was Elizabeth. We were only married 2 years. Did you love her? I did. Do you still? He thought about her face, more a memory than a picture now. I will always care about who she was, but the sharp pain of losing her, that fades. Time has a way of making even big pain get smaller. How long does it take? Well, that depends on the person, but it happens if you let it. Sarah took a sip of milk. Mama cried the night Papa died, but it was not a sad cry. It was more like she was scared and relieved all at once. Does that make her a bad person? No. Ethan's voice was firm. It makes her honest. Not all goodbyes are tragedies, Sarah. Sometimes a death is just the end of something that should have been over long ago. The little girl nodded slowly. They drank their milk in a comfortable quiet. He sent her back to bed, telling her to wake him if anything changed. He stayed by the fire, thinking about the family sleeping in his house. He thought of a man who believed blood gave him the right to own people. Let him come, Ethan thought. Let him try. This place was easy to defend. He learned long ago some fights are not about winning. They are about making the other fellow pay too high a price for starting one. He went to his room as the sky began to lighten. Tomorrow he would check their supplies. He had to keep Martha's fever down and the children fed and warm. But for tonight, they were all safe. The doors were locked, and anyone wanting to harm them would have to get through him first. That was a comfort. Morning came with the heavy silence of a new snow. Ethan woke up to a world buried in white. It was beautiful, but it could also trap a man for weeks. He dressed and went downstairs. Sarah was already in the kitchen, standing watch by her mother's door. How is she? The fever broke an hour ago. Sarah's voice was filled with relief. She is sleeping better now. A weight lifted from Ethan's shoulders. That is good news. That is real good. He built up the fire. Did you get any sleep? A little. Sarah rubbed her eyes. Clara had an accident in the bed. I think she is more scared than she is showing. Being scared is nothing to be ashamed of, Ethan said as he started the coffee. Where is Clara now? Back asleep with Thomas. They are both worn out. Sarah went to the window, looking at the deep snow. That is a whole lot of white. 2 feet, maybe more. We are snowed in for a good while. Ethan joined her. It is a good thing your mama got here when she did. Another week and this road would have been closed. Sarah was quiet, then asked, Do you think Uncle James knows where we are? I do not know. But even if he does, he cannot get through this snow. We have time to figure things out. She nodded. Mama says running away is for cowards. Your mama is wrong about that too, Ethan said, his voice gentle but firm. Sometimes, running is the bravest thing a person can do, especially when staying means letting someone hurt your children. That is not cowardice. That is survival. Uncle James would say we are his blood, that we owe him. Blood does not give anyone the right to hurt you. Loyalty has to be earned, not demanded. Ethan turned to face her. Sarah, you need to understand. You do not owe that man a thing. Not you, not your siblings, and not your mama. Do you understand? Sarah studied his face, then nodded. I will try to understand. That is all I ask. They made breakfast together. Ethan made eggs that were not too bad. When Clara and Thomas woke up, they all ate in the warm kitchen as the snow kept falling. Around mid-morning, Martha finally woke up for real. Ethan heard her talking quietly with Sarah. A little later, Sarah appeared at the kitchen door. Mama wants to see you. Ethan entered the small room. Martha was propped up with pillows. She looked pale and worn out, but her eyes were clear. I am sorry, she said right away, for being a burden. Stop. Ethan pulled a chair close to her bed. You had a fever. It happens. No one is keeping score. Martha's hands twisted the blanket. Sarah said I was talking about things we were not supposed to. You had a high fever. People say all kinds of things, but you heard, did you not? She looked right at him, her face a mix of fear and challenge. About my husband, about why we are really on the run. Ethan was quiet for a second. Sarah told me some things about your husband's brother. About him wanting to take you and the children? Martha's face went pale. She should not have told you that. I told her never to speak of it. She told me because she was scared for you and because I asked her to. Ethan kept his voice steady. Martha, if someone is coming after you, I have a right to know. This is my home. Then send us away. Her words were flat. As soon as the snow clears, we will go. I will not bring trouble to you. I am not sending you anywhere. I am asking you to trust me with the truth. Martha stared at the wall, her jaw set hard. After a long moment, she started to speak in a low voice. My husband's name was Daniel. We married when I was 17. My parents approved. He had a steady job and a good family. Everything seemed right. But it was not. Her voice was just a whisper. No. He was charming at first. But after we were married, he changed. It started with small criticisms. Then his temper got worse. He would break things. Then he started pushing me, and the pushing turned into hitting. Ethan's hands balled into fists under the table. He forced them to relax. I thought about leaving, but I had nowhere to go. My parents were gone. I had no money. And then the children started coming. Sarah, then Clara, then Thomas. Each one made it harder to leave Martha's. Her voice held steady, but her hands were shaking something awful. I kept telling myself it was not that bad, that other women had it worse. If I just tried harder, he would stop. But he never did. He just got smarter about where he left the bruises. The children learned how to be ghosts in their own home, especially Sarah. She got real good at reading his moods. 4 months ago, he fell 3 stories at the mill. The foreman said it was a terrible accident, but I knew better. It was the drink that finally caught up to him. But his brother, James, he is a different kind of trouble. Daniel had a temper, but James is just plain cruel. After the funeral, James came around saying he had rights to us, that I was too weak to raise the children alone. He did not want to marry me. He wanted to own me. When I refused, he started making threats, throwing rocks through our windows at night. So we ran. I grabbed what little money we had, and we just disappeared one night. My aunt out in Montana said there was work, a new start. I never told her about James. I was too ashamed of it all, of how long I let it go on. Then the winter storms came and pinned us down, and I saw your notice. It felt like a sign. But now I have brought his trouble right to your doorstep. James will not give up. Let him come. Ethan's voice was hard as ironwood. This is my land. You are under my roof. That means something out here. You do not understand, she pleaded. He is not a man who cares about what is right. Well, Ethan leaned forward. He's about to learn that some folks push back. I gave you shelter because it was the right thing to do, and a little trouble does not change that. Why? The question was barely a whisper. Why would you risk so much for strangers? Because no one should have to stand alone against the dark, he said quietly. And your children, they deserve a place where they are not always looking over their shoulder. That is reason enough for me. Tears welled in her eyes. How can I ever repay that? You already are, he said, standing up. Just get your strength back. We will face whatever comes, together. He paused at the door. And Martha? What you did, getting your children away from that mess, that was not running. That was pure courage. Make sure they know it. He closed the door softly. In the kitchen, he looked at the children. Your mama is going to be just fine, he told them. Sarah, how about you help me get some soup started? There are vegetables down in the cellar. All right, you and Clara Thomas see to the pork. I have got to check on the stock before the snow gets much deeper. Outside, the world was quiet and white under the thick fallen flakes. Every step through the deep snow was a fight. In the barn, the animals were restless. He checked their food and water, his calm voice soothing them, just like his granddaddy had taught him. The familiar work gave him time to think. He had taken in a woman and her children running from her husband's own brother. Ethan had dodged this exact kind of trouble for 3 years. Now here he was, planning to defend folks he barely knew. He ought to feel trapped. Instead, for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose. For 3 solid days, the storm locked them inside the ranch house. A new rhythm started up. A weak Martha gave orders from her bed, and her children followed them. Sarah took over the kitchen, making simple but good meals. Clara helped with the mending. Even little Thomas, all of 4 years old, had his chores, like fetching firewood. Ethan stayed inside more than he was used to. He sat by the warm stove, whittling little wooden animals for the children. At night, he would read old adventure stories aloud. He saw wonder in Thomas's eyes and something close to a smile on the girls' faces. On the third night, the storm finally broke. Martha came out of her room looking pale but steady on her feet. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, "for watching over them." He looked up. "They are good kids. Made it easy." Martha eased into a chair. "They sure do like you, and that is rare. They do not trust folks easily." "I cannot imagine why," he said, his tone dry as dust. A small smile touched her lips. "Sarah told me what you said, that running is not cowardly. I meant every word of it. I know." She watched her children for a spell. "I always told them to be strong, to just endure. I thought I was making them tough. Maybe I was just teaching them how to suffer." "You did the best you knew how," Ethan said, closing his book. "Is that enough?" she asked. He shrugged. "Ask me in 20 years. That is when you will know." That brought a real tired smile to her face. "You are a good man, Ethan Cole." He just gave a nod, not knowing what to say, but a warm feeling spread in his chest. It felt an awful lot like belonging. Later, over coffee, he asked her what she would do come spring. "I do not know," she said. "The wagon is busted and I cannot stay here forever." "Or maybe," he said after a quiet moment, "I will find I like having a house that feels like a home again." "You are offering us a place to stay?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I am saying, let us not worry about spring in the middle of winter," he replied, meeting her gaze. "One season at a time, Martha." She nodded, and he could see the relief wash over her face. They sat in a comfortable quiet after that. The stars outside were cold and bright, but inside the little ranch house it was warm. The next morning was clear and bitter cold. Ethan woke early, digging paths through the snow. The hard work felt good. He was carrying an armload of firewood back to the house when he saw them. Boot prints, coming from the road leading straight to his barn. Someone had been scouting his property during the night. His blood ran cold. Someone had been out there circling the house from different spots before heading back to the road. The tracks were old, partly covered by snow, but they were there. Whoever it was came during that awful storm, pushing through weather that could kill a man. That showed a grim determination. Ethan followed the tracks to the tree line where they vanished into the deep pines. He stood there a good while, a feeling like eyes on his back, but saw nothing but still woods. When he got back to the house, one look at his face made Martha turn white. "What is it?" "Someone was out here," he said. "Just looking, I reckon, but it was him." Martha's voice was flat. "It's James. He's found us." "You can't know that for sure." "I know," she said, staring out the window. "I know, because I've been expecting it. Men like James never let go of what they think is theirs." Ethan saw how tight she held herself, trying to cage her fear. "Even if it is him, he can't get through this snow, not on my land." "The law means nothing to him," she shot back. "You need to send us away before he comes back and someone gets hurt." "No," Ethan said firm. "We're not making choices out of fear. Yes, someone was here, but we don't know who or why for certain. And if it was James, it changes nothing. You and the children are staying. If he shows up, we'll handle him then. You don't know what he can do." "Then tell me," Ethan said, stepping closer. Because all I see is a woman so used to running she can't imagine standing her ground might be better. Her face was a storm of anger and fear. You think I'm a coward? I think you're terrified. There's a difference, he said, his voice softening. But you're not alone now, Martha. That changes things. Or it just means more folks get hurt when he comes. That's my risk to take. This is my home, Ethan stated, holding her gaze. I'm not letting him run you off, not without a fight. And if fighting gets you killed, then I'll die for something that matters instead of just fading away up here alone. For 3 years, Martha, I've been hiding from grief, from folks, from anything that might hurt. You think I don't know about running? I've been running in place since the day Elizabeth died. Martha looked surprised, the fear in her eyes lessening just a bit. That's different. You lost someone you loved, and you lost years to a man who hurt you. Lost your home, your safety. Don't tell me that's not a grief worth running from. He took a steadying breath. But at some point, running stops being an escape and becomes all you know how to do. I'm done running. The question is, are you? The only sound in the kitchen was the crackle of the fire. They could hear the children waking up, the normal sounds of a new day. Finally, Martha whispered, I don't know how to stop. Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together. She gave a slow nod, tears rolling down her face. If James comes and you get hurt because of us, I could never forgive myself. Then we'll just make sure that don't happen, Ethan said, moving to the door. I'm going to take another look at those tracks. You keep the children inside today. Don't let them out of your sight. You understand? Yes. And Martha, load that rifle behind the door, just in case. Her eyes got wide. I don't know how. I bet Sarah does. I bet if her daddy hunted, he'd have taught the oldest. He pulled on his coat. Ask her. And if anyone you don't know comes to this door, you don't open it, you hear me? Martha nodded, fear and a new resolve in her eyes. Be careful. For 2 solid hours, Ethan followed the tracks in the snow, trying to piece together the story they told. The fellow who made them was tall and heavy, leaving deep prints that spoke of a man with purpose. He'd come from the east, right up the valley road during the storm, which showed he was either desperate or mighty determined. The tracks eventually led back into the woods, but Ethan lost them. Standing in the quiet, all he heard was the wind, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Back at the house, he found Sarah showing her mama how to handle the old Winchester rifle. A fresh wave of anger hit him. It was a crying shame a man taught his 9-year-old daughter how to use a weapon, but not how to feel safe in her own home. Good, he said, startling them both. Keep it handy. I don't reckon anyone's coming today, but it is always better to be ready. The rest of the day was thick with tension. Ethan stayed close to the house. The children, sensing the unease, played quietly inside. Martha moved like a machine, her eyes darting between the windows and the rifle propped against the wall. Evening arrived without any trouble. As dusk settled, Ethan walked the property one last time, looking for any new sign of a visitor. He found nothing, but that brought him no peace. Just because you can't see a snake doesn't mean it isn't in the grass. That night, instead of heading to his own room, he laid out a bedroll by the stove where he could see both doors. Martha didn't say a word. She just gave a knowing nod and took her children to their room. But before she shut the door, she looked back at him. Thank you, she said softly, for not running away too. Then she was gone, leaving Ethan in the dark with his thoughts and the Winchester across his lap. He sat there for hours, watching and listening. He figured if James was coming, he would find out that some folks don't give up their own without a fight. The morning would have its own answers, but that night, he was the watchman. And knowing everyone under his roof was safe felt like it was worth everything. The stranger showed up 3 days later. It was just after noon, with the sun feeling deceptively warm. Ethan was out back splitting firewood when he heard it. the slow, steady beat of horse hooves on the snow-covered road. He set his axe down and moved to where he could get a good look without being seen himself. It was a single rider on a big bay horse, a large man wearing a heavy coat and a low-brimmed hat. Even from far off, the man rode with an air of pure arrogance, like he owned the whole darn county. Ethan's gut twisted into a knot. He circled back to the house through the barn. The moment Martha saw his face, she turned pale. "Someone is here," he said quietly. "Stay inside with the children, and lock this door behind me." He took the Winchester from its spot by the wall and checked that it was loaded. "Martha, lock the door, I mean it. No matter what happens, you keep those children safe and that door bolted. Do you understand?" She nodded, already herding the little ones toward their room. Ethan stepped outside, pulling the door shut and hearing the lock slide home. The rider had reached the yard, stopping his horse about 20 feet from the porch. Up close, he was even bigger than he looked from a distance, with a cruel set to his face. His eyes were a pale, cold blue, and they scanned the property like a man taking inventory of things he planned to own. "Can I help you?" Ethan's voice was steady, the rifle held loose but ready. "I'm looking for my family," the man said, his voice deep and smooth, which somehow made it sound more menacing. "My brother's widow and her children. A woman by the name of Martha Hale." Ethan didn't flinch. "Can't say that I have. This is private property. You need to state your business or move on." The man offered a smile that held no warmth at all. "Private property? That is interesting. I happen to know my sister-in-law was headed this way, and there are not many places to stop out here." "Then maybe she kept right on going," Ethan replied. The man's pale eyes locked onto Ethan's. "Or maybe she is here. Maybe some good soul took her in, not knowing she was running from her family obligations." "Family obligations," Ethan repeated, letting the words hang in the frosty air. "Is that what you call it?" A flicker of anger crossed the man's face. "I call it taking care of my own blood. My brother passed, leaving a wife and 3 kids. It is my duty to provide for them." The man swung down from his horse with a surprising ease. "Now I am going to ask you one more time, nice and friendly-like. Have you seen Martha Hale and her children?" Ethan lifted the Winchester just enough to make his point clear. "And I am going to tell you one more time. This is my land. Anyone on it is here because I invited them, and I do not recall sending you an invitation." The man's smile turned ugly. "You are making a big mistake, friend. This is family business. It became my business the second you rode onto my property uninvited." "Is that right?" the man sneered, taking a step forward. "Do you even know who I am?" "Do not care who you are. The name is James Hale. Maybe Martha mentioned me. I have legal rights to those children." Ethan's voice went cold as ice. "That is interesting, because the last I checked, the law does not just hand a man's children to his brother, not when their mother is alive and perfectly capable. A woman alone cannot raise 3 children properly," James said with a cold smirk. "They need a firm hand. A judge would surely agree with me, especially after she ran off, proving she is unstable." "You can argue a lot of things," Ethan said. "That does not make them true." James stopped about 10 feet from the porch. "Here is what I believe. I believe my sister-in-law is scared and confused. And I believe whoever is hiding her has no idea what he's getting himself into." "Then let me tell you what you are getting into." Ethan's voice was calm, but there was steel behind it. "You are standing on my land, making threats. You can turn that horse around and ride back the way you came. Or you can keep pushing and find out just how little your claims matter when you are trespassing with hostile intent." James studied him for a long moment, then let out a harsh laugh. "You are either very brave or very stupid. I do not much care what you decide as long as you decide to leave." "Oh, I will leave," James said, turning back to his horse. "For now, but this is not over. Those children are my blood. That woman owes me, and I always collect what is owed. He swung into the saddle, but before he rode off, he looked back at the house, his cold eyes lingering on the windows. You tell Martha I will be back. Tell her family always finds family, and tell her I am a patient man. I can wait out a winter. But when spring thaws these roads, he said with a cold smile, we'll see how brave her protector is without a fortress of snow. I'll tell her you're not welcome back. James's eyes went hard. You're making an enemy you don't want, friend. Better that than letting a bully take what ain't his. For a second, a dangerous rage flashed in James's face, held back only by his own cold calculations. Then he tipped his hat in a mocking gesture and turned his horse. See you in the spring, friend. He rode off slow and deliberate, making it clear he was leaving by choice. Ethan watched him disappear into the trees and waited longer still, just to be sure. Only then did he head back to the house. The door flew open before he reached it. Martha stood there, holding the rifle, terror on her face. Was that him? It was. Ethan stepped inside and bolted the door. The children were huddled by the stove, Sarah holding them close, all their eyes wide with fear. What did he say? Martha's voice trembled. He wanted me to tell you he knows where you are. He'll wait till spring. Says he always collects what's his. He thinks you and these children are his property. He'll be back, she said. It wasn't a question. When the snow melts, he'll come back with the law, or with hired men. Let him try. Ethan, you don't get it. James only makes threats he can keep. If he says he'll be here, he will. And he'll bring enough men to win. Then we'll have to be ready. Ethan needed something to do with his hands, so he moved to the stove. That's months from now. A lot can change. Like what? Martha's laugh was bitter. Winter ends, and we're right back to running, or fighting a battle we can't win. Ethan looked at the children's frightened faces, then at Martha's white knuckles on the rifle. Or, he said slowly, we make sure that when spring comes, you're not as helpless as James thinks you are. Martha just stared at him. What are you talking about? I'm saying we use this winter. We get ready. We make sure that if he comes back, he finds something he wasn't counting on. How? An idea was forming in Ethan's mind. One that was either brilliant or pure crazy. By making sure his legal claim won't stand up in any court. By making sure you're not some helpless widow he can push around. I don't understand. Marry me. The words landed in the quiet kitchen like stones. Martha's mouth opened and closed. The children just stared. What? Marry me, Ethan repeated, the idea feeling more solid as he said it. James's whole case is that you're an unfit mother, a woman alone who can't care for 3 kids. But if you're married to a man who owns land with a good home, his argument falls apart. You won't be alone. The children will have a father. Everything he plans to use against you turns to dust. You can't be serious. I am dead serious, he said earnestly. Look, this ain't about romance, I know that. But it solves the problem. It gives you legal protection. It makes these children legally mine, too, so James can't touch them. It's a lot harder to call a married woman unstable than a widow on the run. Martha just shook her head. You don't want to marry me. You don't even know me. I know you're a good mother. I know you're brave enough to do whatever it takes to protect your children. I know you're a hard worker, he said, trying for a small smile. And I know this house has felt more like a home in the last few weeks than it has since Elizabeth passed. That's not nothing. But what about you? What do you get from this but a whole heap of trouble? Why take on James and 3 kids that are not mine? Because I'm tired of being alone. I get to help someone and stand up to a bully. That is reason enough for me. This is not a sacrifice, Martha, just a practical choice. I am not asking for love, only a partnership. You keep the house, I will provide protection. We will face James together. Ethan then spoke to the children. Your mama and I are talking about getting married to keep you safe. What do you think? Sarah asked. Would we get to stay here? Yes. And Uncle James could not make us go? He would have a much harder time. I would be your stepfather, with the right to protect you. Clara then asked her question. Would you be our papa? The question hit Ethan hard. I would be your stepfather. That is a little different. Just someone else who cares. Then Thomas spoke up. Will you be mean like Papa was? Ethan knelt to the boy's level. No, Thomas, I promise you that. I will never hit you, your sisters, or your mama. The boy studied his face, then nodded. Okay. Mama, can we stay? Clara pleaded. I need to think, Martha said. What is there to think about? Sarah said sharply. We stay here, we are safe. We leave, James finds us. It is simple. She looked at Ethan. You would really marry Mama for us? I would. And you would not expect things? Ethan understood. This would be a marriage in name only. Your Mama will have her room, I will have mine. I give you my word. Then I think we should say yes, Sarah told her mother. You are only 9, Martha said. But you are going to say no because you are proud and think we are not worth the trouble. Sarah's voice broke. But we are worth it, Mama. If he is offering help, we should take it. Martha looked from her daughter to Ethan. Why are you really doing this? Tell me the truth. Because I am tired of being half alive, he said. You all reminded me what it feels like to be needed. When James threatened you on my land, something woke up in me. It told me this is worth fighting for. You would be a reason to get up in the morning. I'm not promising it will be easy, but I promise you will never face James alone again, and these children will have a safe home. Martha looked at her hopeful children, then at the man who sheltered them. If we do this, she said, it has to be legal with a preacher, so James cannot challenge it. Agreed. And you will not expect me to be a wife in every single way? I just expect you to be yourself. She was quiet, then gave a sharp nod. All right. Yes. I will marry you for the children's protection, but I may never love you like a wife should. I may not love you that way either, but I already respect you. Maybe that is enough to build on. When? As soon as the roads are clear, I will get a preacher, before James makes his move. Sarah stepped forward. Thank you, Mr. Cole. Please call me Ethan. The girl nodded. Ethan, then. The other children moved closer. Martha watched from across the room. I will hold you to your promises, she said quietly, about keeping us safe and being a better man. Good, he said. And if I ever break them, you take that rifle and you run. Later, they planned the practical details like a business deal. In the middle of it all, Martha's hand briefly rested on his. She said nothing, but the touch was a sign of trust. Then she left. That single gesture said she was willing to try. Ethan sat in the quiet for a long time. James would be back with the spring, that was certain. But he would find a family. One born of need. But a family that had all winter to grow strong. Outside, the stars were bright and cold. Inside, the fire burned steady. For the first time in years, Ethan felt he was building a future, not just hiding from the past. What was building between them was not love, not yet anyway, but it was something real and decent. And it was worth protecting. Sometimes, that is more than enough. The wedding was a simple thing on a Tuesday in late January. Ethan had made the hard ride to Hollow Ridge the week before to fetch Reverend Michaels and the proper papers. The Reverend was a practical man who understood the frontier. When Ethan explained it was a marriage for legal protection, Michaels just nodded. He said that sometimes a practical arrangement is its own kind of blessing. So there they stood in the kitchen, with the children as their witnesses. The Reverend's voice filled the room with the old, heavy words. Martha wore her best dress, a faded blue one, and Ethan had put on a clean shirt. It was not fancy, but it was honest. Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman to be your wife? He looked at Martha's pale, serious face. Her eyes were full of questions she would not ask out loud. He thought about how crazy this all was, and how it was the only thing that made any sense at all. I do, he said, his voice firm. And do you, Martha Hale, take this man to be your husband? Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. I do. Well then, the Reverend said, closing his Bible with a soft thump, by the power of the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you man and wife. You can kiss your bride. They shared an awkward look. Then Martha stood on her toes and gave him a quick, shy kiss on the cheek. Thank you, she whispered, for giving us a chance. Just do not make me regret it, he answered. He meant it as a joke, but it came out sounding more sincere than he intended. After the Reverend left, the new family stood there in the quiet kitchen, bound together by law. In the eyes of the law, we were a family, but inside that same old fear was knocking at the door. Well, Martha finally said, I reckon being married does not mean we get to skip supper. Soon the little kitchen was filled with the familiar sounds of a meal being made, and for a moment things felt almost right. Ethan watched them, a feeling like contentment settling in his chest. Sarah came and stood beside him at the window, looking out at the snow. Are you scared, she asked in a small voice, of Uncle James? A little, Ethan admitted, but mostly I am just set on seeing this through. There is a difference. What if he comes back with the law? Then we will show them our papers, he said, looking down at her. We will show them you have a home and a mother, and now a stepfather who can provide. The law is supposed to protect children, Sarah. We will fight him the right way first, and if that does not work, we will find another way. That is what families do. They figure things out together. I'm mighty glad Mama married you, even if it is just for pretend. It is not pretend, Ethan said, touching her shoulder. It is just a different kind of marriage. And I am glad, too. You are good kids, worth looking after. The girl's eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears back hard. Our papa never said anything like that. Well, your papa was a fool. That evening, for the first time, they ate dinner like a real family. They were legally tied together now, not just thrown together by trouble. The talk was cautious as everyone felt their way around this new life. But something real was there. Fragile, but right. Later that night, Martha knocked on Ethan's door. He had moved his things back upstairs to give them space. Now she stood in the doorway, looking unsure. Can we talk for a minute? Of course, he said, pointing to a chair. I wanted to be clear on things, now that we are truly married. She sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap. You said this was in name only. I need to know you meant that. I need to know you will not change your mind now that the papers are signed. Martha, you are not a piece of property, Ethan said. This marriage gives you legal protection. It gives me the right to defend you and the children. That is all. Your room is your own. Your choices are your own. Nothing has changed except for what we show the world. And if folks start talking, let them talk. What happens in this house is our business. She nodded, and some of the tightness left her shoulders. I know I am not the kind of woman you would have chosen. We do not always get to choose, he said, moving to the other chair. We just have to handle the hand we are dealt. But if I had to pick someone to face down a hard winter and a coming threat, I would pick someone just like you, practical, brave, and you make a fine cup of coffee. That is a solid start for anything. A small smile touched her lips. You must have low standards if good coffee ranks that high. You have never had to drink my coffee. A good cup of coffee is a blessing. She let out a short, surprised laugh. Then she grew serious again. When spring comes, James will be back. It is going to get ugly. He will not just give up. He will fight, and he will scheme to take them. Then we will fight harder and scheme smarter, Ethan replied, holding her gaze. We will make him understand that this is one battle he cannot win. I meant what I said, Martha. Those children are under my protection now. James will have to come through me to get to them, and I promise you I will not make that easy for him. You could get hurt. He is a dangerous man when he's crossed. So am I, Ethan said softly. He just does not know it yet. Martha looked at his face and saw something that made her believe him. All right, then. We will get ready. We will make sure we are ready when he comes. Exactly. She stood up to leave, but paused at the door. Ethan, thank you for being a man we can trust. He simply nodded. After she was gone, he sat alone in the dark, thinking about the strange new family he now had. The threat was out there, somewhere past all that snow. He should have felt trapped. Instead, he felt like he had a purpose again. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. The children started to relax. Sarah began helping Ethan with the barn chores, proving to be strong for her size. Clara followed Martha in the kitchen, learning her recipes with a serious focus. And young Thomas, he just soaked up the quiet peace of a home without shouting, and his nightmares started to fade. February brought a bitter cold, but the skies were clear. Ethan used the time to teach the children what they would need to know. He taught them how to read the weather and how to handle the livestock. He also taught them how to shoot straight. "Why do we need to know this?" Clara asked one afternoon, her small hands carefully loading the rifle. "Because knowing things keeps you safe," Ethan told her. "The more you can do for yourself, the less you have to rely on others. Is something bad going to happen?" "I sure hope not, but hoping is not a plan. We plan for the worst and hope for the best." Martha watched these lessons with a mix of pride and fear. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she finally asked him, "What if James does not come back? Do you really believe that?" She was quiet for a moment before answering. "No. James never gives up. Us getting married probably just made him more determined." "Then we keep preparing," he said. "It is better to be ready for something that never happens than to be caught unprepared." "And what about after? After we handle James, what happens then? Do we just keep on living like this? Married, but not really a family?" Ethan thought about it for a long time. "I do not know. Maybe we will figure that out when we get there. Maybe this becomes more real than we ever thought it would. Right now, what we have is respect and a shared goal. That is more than a lot of folks start with." "Is it enough?" "Ask me again in a year," Ethan said with a slight smile. March came in with fierce winds and more snow, but there were signs that winter was losing its grip. The sun felt a little warmer each day, and as the snow began to melt, the tension in the house grew thicker. Everyone knew the clearer roads meant James could finally reach them. Ethan checked his ammunition. Martha went over stories with the children, making sure they knew what to say. Sarah practiced with the rifle until she could hit a tin can from 50 paces. The confrontation finally happened in the middle of April. Ethan was in the barn when he heard the sound of several horses. He grabbed his rifle and peered out. It was James, flanked by two rough-looking men who wore their guns openly. They rode into the yard like they owned the place. Ethan stepped out from the barn, his Winchester held at his side. From the corner of his eye, he saw Martha appear on the porch, holding her own rifle. "You again," James called out, his voice slick with fake friendliness. "I told you I would be back, and I told you that you were not welcome here." "Well, things have changed," James said, pulling papers from his coat. "I have witnesses now, and I have a document signed by a judge granting me custody of my brother's children. This says their mother is unfit." "That is interesting," Ethan said, his voice calm and steady. "Because I have papers, too." He held them up. "A marriage certificate, making Martha my wife. And legal adoption papers for all 3 children, making them mine. Your blood rights just got a whole lot weaker." James's smile vanished. "You married her?" "2 months ago," Ethan replied. "The preacher himself was here. It is all legal and proper, and those children are mine now." James's voice turned cold as a winter creek. "That was a fool move, farmer." "Was it?" Ethan countered. "Seems to me your claim just turned into a custody battle. An uncle against a mother and a legal stepfather. You want to guess how that plays out? You think a piece of paper will stop me?" James sneered, swinging down from his horse, his men right behind him. "I think it means you cannot just ride in here and take these children, and I think it means you need to get off my land. Big words for 1 man against 3. Make that 2. Martha's voice, steady and clear, came from the porch. She held a rifle, and it was not shaking one bit. 2 against 3, and my children inside know how to use the other guns if we need them." James just stared. "You made this a fight when you followed us," she said, her voice like flint. "I ran from Daniel because I had to protect my children. But I am done running. You want them? You will have to go through us." It a bit. The law favors blood, sure, but it also favors a stable home with two parents over a single man with a mean streak. Ethan took a slow step closer. "Yeah, we looked into you. It took some doing, but folks remember you, James. They remember the brawls and the shouting. They remember that woman back in Ohio who filed a complaint before you paid her to make it go away. You are not the man you pretend to be." James's face went dark with fury. "You dug into my past. I did my homework. You should have done the same before riding up here thinking you could scare us." Ethan's voice was steady as a rock. "Now here is what is going to happen. You and your boys are going to get back on your horses. You are going to take those worthless papers with you, and you are going to leave my family in peace. Or what happens? Or I call the sheriff and file for harassment. I get a restraining order. I will tie you up in so much legal trouble that this whole thing becomes a bigger headache than it is worth. Daniel was your brother. I get that. But these children do not want to go with you. Their mother wants nothing to do with you. Pushing this will just make everyone miserable. They are my blood. Blood does not mean you own people." Martha's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. "I was married to your brother for 10 long years. 10 years of tiptoeing around his temper, of hiding bruises, of teaching my children how to be small and quiet so he would not get angry. I will not put them through that ever again. Not for you, not for blood, not for anything. I am not my brother. You are just like him, maybe even meaner. You do not want a family. You want something to control." Martha's hands trembled, but her shotgun did not waver. "The answer is no. It has always been no, and it will always be no. Find another way to honor your brother." A tense silence fell over the yard. Then one of James's men shifted his feet. "Boss, maybe we ought to rethink this. This is not what you told us it was. A legal marriage changes things. This could get real messy." James's jaw was set like stone. "We are not leaving without—" "Yes, we are." The second man was already walking to his horse. "I signed up for an easy job, not a shootout with a family on their own land. That is how a man gets arrested or worse. I am done. You get back here." But it was too late. The men were already riding away. James stared after them, helpless and furious. He turned that anger back on Ethan and Martha. "This is not over." "Yes, it is." Ethan's voice was flat. "It is over because you do not really care about those kids. You just care about winning, and you lost. The best you can do now is ride away with what little dignity you have left." James glared, his hatred so thick you could feel it. He said nothing more, just turned his horse and galloped away. For a long time, Ethan and Martha stood in the quiet yard, their rifles still up. The only sounds were the birds starting to sing again and the livestock settling down. The danger had passed. Finally, Martha lowered her gun, her hands shaking badly. "Is it really over?" "I reckon so." Ethan gently took the rifle from her. "He knows he cannot win this in a courtroom, and I do not think he cares enough to try anything outside the law. It is too much risk for wounded pride. But what if you are wrong? Then we will handle it. But Martha, you look at me." He waited for her to meet his gaze. You faced him down. You did not run. You stood your ground for your family and your life. That is everything. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "I have never done anything like that before. You were magnificent." The farmhouse door flew open, and the three children rushed out. They had seen the whole thing from inside. They all hugged Martha at once, chattering and making sure she was all right. Ethan stepped back, watching the family he now belonged to. Sarah looked over at him, a wide, true smile on her face. "We did it. We really did it." "Y'all did it," Ethan corrected gently. "Your mama did it. I was just the backup. You were more than that." Martha stepped away from the children to stand beside him. You gave us a safe place to land. Without you, we would still be running. And without y'all, I would still be rattling around this place alone. So I guess we are even. They stood together in the morning sun, a makeshift family bound by circumstance, feeling the relief wash over them. The weeks that followed felt like a true spring. The ranch came alive, and with Martha and the children there, every small joy felt bigger. The kids started acting like kids again. Clara brought in wildflowers. Thomas proudly learned to gather eggs, and Sarah helped Ethan with the planting, asking smart questions. And Martha, she finally started to unwind. The worry she carried in her shoulders began to fade. Her laugh became a more common sound. One night in May, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch. The stars were bright in the dark sky. I have been thinking, Martha said quietly, about this life we have made here. Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. I think it is more than just an arrangement now. It might not be a traditional marriage, but it is something real. She turned to him. You are a good father to them. A better one than Daniel ever was. They trust you. They are good kids. Easy to care for. And what about me? Am I easy to care for? The question was so honest and vulnerable. You are one of the strongest people I've ever known. You are smart and brave, and you have made this ranch feel like a home again. So yes, you are very easy to care about. And respect. He searched for the right words. You are easy to build a life with, but not easy to love. I did not say that. He faced her directly. Martha, I do not know what to call what is between us. It started as a practical solution, a way to keep you safe. But it has become something else. I do not have a name for it. Maybe it is love, maybe it is just a deep partnership. Does it really need a name? I suppose not. She was quiet for a bit. I was so sure I would never trust a man again. But you have been nothing but decent and patient. You gave us safety and asked for nothing. I do not know what to do with that. Then do not do anything. Just let it be. Ethan reached over and took her hand. We have time now. No more running. We can figure this out as we go. Her fingers wrapped around his. What if this is all I can ever give? What if this is as close to a real marriage as I can get? Then this is what we will have. I am not going anywhere, Martha. I am committed to this family, to you, and to these children. That does not depend on romance. You are a strange man, Ethan Cole. I have heard that before. He smiled in the dark. But I am your strange man now, for better or worse. For better or worse, she whispered back. And this time, her smile was real. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands under the vast, starry sky. They were two people who had found each other when they needed it most, and had built something strong and true out of nothing but necessity and hope. That ranch was humming with work from sunup to sundown. The kids just blossomed in all that warmth and purpose. Sarah got to be a real hand with the chores. Clara, it turned out, had a magic touch with the garden. Young Thomas stood a little taller each day, the fear slowly leaving his eyes. And somewhere between all the hard work and shared meals, Ethan and Martha started building something that felt a whole lot like a real marriage. It was not a storybook romance, but something tougher and more real. A partnership built on respect and knowing they had faced down danger together and come out the other side. Martha still kept to her own room, but the walls she had built around herself were not quite so high. A hand might rest on Ethan's shoulder, or a smile might pass between them across the dinner table. One August night, with the children sleeping upstairs, Martha came to Ethan's door. This time she looked sure of herself. She did not waste any time on small talk. I have been thinking about this marriage, about us. Ethan put his book down. I do not know if I can ever be the kind of wife you are supposed to be. Daniel broke something in me, but I think I'm ready. She took a deep breath for courage. I think I would like to try being more than just partners, to see if this can be real in all the ways that count. Ethan stood and walked over to her. "Are you sure about that, Martha? Because there is no pressure from me. What we have is good enough. Maybe for you," she said. "But I have been walking around half dead for so long. You have shown me there is more to life if I am brave enough to take it." She looked right at him. "So I am reaching, if you will have me, for real, not just on paper. I will have you any way I can get you," Ethan said, touching her face. "But we will go at your speed. No demands, just two folks figuring things out together." "Together," Martha agreed. "I like that sound." The kiss he gave her was soft and gentle, giving her plenty of room to back away. But she did not. She leaned into it, her hands finding his shoulders. It was not a kiss of passion, but one of care and promise. When they parted, quiet tears were rolling down Martha's cheeks. "I did not think I could ever do that again. I did not think I could let anyone that close." "But you did," he said. "You were brave." "We were brave," she corrected him with a little smile. "Together." That fall felt like a blessing, warm and full of the quiet joy that comes from a good harvest. They brought in the crops as a family, working side by side to prepare for the coming winter. But this year, they were not strangers huddled together for survival. They were a true family. Sarah started saying she wanted to be a rancher, just like Ethan. Clara learned she could predict the weather by watching the animals, becoming their little weather woman. Thomas was not scared of loud noises anymore and followed Ethan around like a shadow, learning how to be a good man. And Martha, well, Martha bloomed. She laughed easy now and sang while she worked. The hard lines of fear on her face softened. She was still strong, but now she was open, too. They never did have a traditional marriage bed. The closeness they found was in the simple things, sitting in comfortable silence, working on the ranch together, and raising 3 children who needed them both. They were building a life that mattered piece by piece. When the first snow came in November, a year after Martha and the kids had arrived, they all stood on the porch and watched. "Another winter," Sarah said. "You reckon it will be as hard as the last one?" "No," Ethan said with certainty. "Last year we were just folks learning to trust each other. This year we are family. That makes all the difference. And if Uncle James comes back, he will not get far," Martha added, her voice firm. "If he does, we will handle him just like we did before, together." Thomas pulled on Ethan's sleeve. "Pa, will you read us a story tonight? The one about the bear?" Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. It was the first time Thomas had called him Pa without even thinking about it. He looked at Martha and saw her eyes were misty, just like his. "Of course, buddy. I will read you a story, just like every night." "Good," Thomas said, leaning against his leg. "I like when you read. You make the scary parts not so scary." They all went inside as the snow started falling harder, shutting the door on the cold world outside. Ethan read a story while the kids listened, and Martha mended a shirt by the lamp. Everything felt right. This was not the life he had planned when he put up that crooked sign for a cook. It was messier and harder, but it was also richer and more meaningful than anything he could have ever dreamed up. Winter had brought him a woman and 3 children looking for a safe harbor. He had offered them a roof over their heads and protection. In return, they had given him something he did not even know he was looking for. They had become a family, built on choice and trust, not blood. Outside, the snow piled up, covering everything in white. But inside the ranch house, the fire was warm, and 5 people were safe and sound. They had all been broken in their own ways. But here, in the cold of winter, they had found each other and built something whole. It was not perfect, but it was real and solid. And as Ethan's voice filled the quiet room with tales of heroes, he knew in his bones that he would never be truly alone again. Not with Martha by his side, her hand resting on his shoulder, and not with 3 children who called this place home and called him something mighty close to a father. The seasons would turn, and the years would pass. But this family, built in a time of trouble and strengthened by choice, would last. And that was more than enough. That was everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.